All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Let's do it.
This time, we're going way back into U.S. history to explore something that, well, it might just shock some people.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
We're talking about the Electoral College, but not just how it works.
Right.
We're going to uncover its connection to slavery. Yeah, you heard that right.
It's a pretty fascinating and often overlooked part of the story.
Exactly. And our main source for this journey is a 2024 article from Al Jazeera. They really did some digging here.
Yeah, they uncovered some details that, honestly, even I was surprised by.
I know, right? So before we get into all the historical drama, let's just level set for a second.
Sure. What do you want to cover?
Can you remind us how the Electoral College actually works? I mean, I know it's how we pick the president, but...
Yeah, it's not as straightforward as some people might think. It's not just a simple popular vote.
Right, right.
Each state gets a certain number of these things called electors, and it's based on how many people they have representing them in Congress.
Makes sense so far.
And it's these electors who actually vote for the president.
Gotcha. Okay, so the Al Jazeera article called Slavery the Problem back then, when they were setting all this up, what did they mean by that?
Well, you see, the number of electors each state gets is tied to its population size.
Yeah.
And that's where things get interesting.
Oh, I bet. This is where the South saw a way to, game the system, right?
Exactly. Remember, this was a time when slavery was deeply entrenched in the U.S.
Right, front and center in a lot of ways.
And how they decided to count slaves in the population had a massive impact on the whole Electoral College situation.
Hold on, back up for a sec. How did they even count slaves? They couldn't vote, right?
You're right, they couldn't. And that was the big issue.
Okay, I'm starting to see where the conflict was.
The southern states, well, they wanted slaves to count toward their population, even though those slaves didn't have any voting rights.
Why would they want that if those people couldn't vote anyway?
Because a bigger population meant more representation in the House of Representatives for the southern states.
Ah, and more power in the Electoral College.
Exactly. Meanwhile, a lot of the northern delegates, many who opposed slavery, they argued that only free people should be counted.
Okay, so this was a huge point of disagreement then.
It was a massive source of tension.
Wait a minute. Is this where the 3/5 compromise comes in? I vaguely remember learning about that in school, but...
Ding, ding, ding. You got it. The 3/5 compromise, that was their solution.
That's messed up, to say the least. So basically, they decided that each slave would count as 3/5 of a person.
Pretty much. And this, of course, directly affected how many representatives each state got in Congress, and as a result, how many electors they had in the Electoral College.
So they literally gave more power to states because of the people they enslaved.
That's exactly what happened. The southern states got a lot more power when it came to picking the president.
And of course, the slaves themselves had absolutely no say in any of this.
None whatsoever. It's a really stark example
of how messed up things were.
Exactly.
The article even highlighted Virginia as a prime example of this, saying they had control over a quarter of the electoral votes needed to win. And all that thanks to,
to enslaved people being counted this way, yeah.
Wow. So this whole system.
A system designed to appease those southern slaveholding states.
Right. It had a huge lasting impact.
An impact that's still felt today, even.
It's kind of crazy, right? This compromise that came from such a dark time in American history, it's still affecting how we pick our president today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about the numbers either.
What do you mean?
Well, this whole system, it actually contributed to the tensions that led to the Civil War.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. When Lincoln was elected in 1860...
An anti-slavery Republican.
Right. The southern states saw it as a direct threat to their power.
Because the Electoral College had given them so much influence up to that point.
Exactly. The system that was, in a way, designed to hold the country together.
Ended up helping to tear it apart.
Yeah, pretty much. Secession was, in part, a reaction to that loss of control. And even after the Civil War, after slavery was abolished,
the Electoral College just stayed in place.
It did. It's a real reminder of how deeply embedded this system is in U.S. politics, even today.
It makes you wonder if anyone's ever tried to change it. I mean, knowing what we know now about its origins, wouldn't it make sense to at least consider some reforms?
Actually, you might be surprised to hear this, but the U.S. almost got rid of the Electoral College entirely back in 1969.
No way, really?
Yeah, the House of Representatives actually passed an amendment to the Constitution.
To completely replace it?
Yep, with a national popular vote.
So we were that close to getting rid of it. Wow. So what happened? Why didn't it go through?
Well, it was blocked in the Senate.
Hi.
Southern senators, they understood the historical implications. the potential shift in power.
Oh, right. It would totally change the balance.
Exactly. And so it never went to the states for ratification. It just goes to show how hard it is to change something so fundamental to our system, even when
there's a really strong argument to be made for reform.
Exactly.
So are we stuck with it then? Is there any chance at all of changing the Electoral College in the future?
Well, some folks argue that it still serves a purpose.
Really?
They say that it protects the interests of smaller states,
Okay, I can kind of see that.
And it forces candidates to campaign in more areas of the country instead of just focusing on big cities with lots of people.
That's a fair point.
But then others argue that it goes against the idea of one person, one vote.
Right, and that it gives too much power to swing states. That's a term I hear a lot, but what exactly does it mean?
A swing state is one where the election is usually pretty close.
Oh.
It could go either way.
Yeah.
So candidates spend most of their time and money campaigning in those places, and they kind of ignore the states that are
already considered safe for one party or the other.
Right. So if you live in a state where the outcome is pretty much a foregone conclusion,
your vote doesn't matter as much.
That's the argument, yeah. Yeah. And it can have a real impact on how many people even bother to vote.
Yeah, I can see why people wouldn't feel motivated if they felt like their vote didn't count.
It's one of the biggest criticisms of the Electoral College, for sure.
So where do we go from here? Is the Electoral College here to stay, or is there any real chance of getting rid of it? Are there any alternatives being seriously considered?
There are some efforts to change the system. Some people are still pushing for a constitutional amendment.
Right.
And there are other ideas out there, too, like this thing called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact.
Ooh, that's one I haven't heard of. What's that all about?
It's kind of a workaround, actually.
How so?
It's basically an agreement between several states where they promise to give all their electoral votes to whoever wins the national popular vote.
Even if that person didn't win in their state?
Yeah. Exactly. It's like trying to bypass the Electoral College without actually changing the Constitution.
Pretty clever. But wouldn't they need a lot of states to agree to this for it to work?
Oh, yeah, for sure. They need enough states to represent a majority of the electoral votes. It's a long shot, but...
But it shows that there's a real desire for change.
Definitely.
So even though the Electoral College has been around forever and it's like built into our system...
There are still people trying to change it.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to those basic questions about fairness, and representation, and what it really means to have a democracy that truly reflects the will of the people.
It's incredible how something that was created so long ago in such a different context can still be so controversial today.
It really shows how powerful these political structures can be and how hard it is to change them, even when
society's values and needs have changed.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot today from the history of the Electoral College, too. So just to, sum it all up, the Electoral College, it was a compromise.
It was.
And it was made to, keep the southern slaveholding states happy.
Right.
Which gave them a lot more power than they should have had when it came to choosing the president.
It did.
And sadly, that's a legacy that's still affecting elections in the U.S. even today.
Yeah, it definitely raises some big questions about fairness.
Totally.
About representation. About what it really means to have a democracy that truly reflects what the people want.
Exactly. So, knowing all of this history, do you think the Electoral College is still a fair way to elect the president?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think that's a question each listener has to grapple with on their own, honestly. There's no easy answer. But understanding the history, the compromises that were made, the consequences of those decisions, I think that's crucial for anyone who wants to be part of our democracy.
I couldn't agree more. It's been really eye-opening to explore all of this with you.
It has been fascinating, yeah.
Hopefully our little deep dive today has given everyone listening a new way of thinking about the Electoral College.
And maybe spark some curiosity to go learn even more about it.
Exactly. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.